Get ready to hear some timeless historical radio broadcasts. Thank you for visiting Golden Age Radio. Listen to the complete NBC and CBS D-Day broadcasts on rebel.com/C/GAR. Support our veterans by visiting veteransradioministry.com. Let's honor their sacrifice. Thank you.
WEAF, New York.
We shall pause now while Dr. Israel Goldstein, President of the Synagogue Council of America, leads in prayer. Dr. Goldstein.
Lord of hosts, girded for battle against the blasphemers of thy name, a mighty host of free men are resolved to crush oppression. Today, as our sons and the sons of our allies enter upon the final act in the drama of liberation, our prayers go with them. Anxiety mingled with pride fills our hearts. We know the cost may be heavy, but we shrink not, for the future of our children's children is at stake. Arise, O Lord, and let thine enemies be scattered. Then speed the dawn of peace, O Father of mercy. May the reign of evil go up as the smoke, and thou alone rule supreme over a family of nations dwelling in security and in concord, with none to make them afraid. Amen.
Thank you, Dr. Goldstein. We take you now to Hollywood.
Continuing with NBC's coverage of D-Day, the following program will be interrupted without delay in the event there is any late invasion news. Ladies and gentlemen, Miss Ginny Sims.
Mothers and fathers of America, I know what is in your hearts tonight. Night is falling on the greatest day in the history of all free people, D-Day, Tuesday, June 6, 1944. At dawn this morning, the Supreme Commander of our Allied invasion forces uttered two words that put an end to months of torturous waiting, months of not knowing. Those two fateful words were, "Let's go." And with those two all-important words went millions of mighty cheers, many unknown fears, and many unshed tears. But your sons, your loved ones, didn't wait to wonder or be afraid. They sailed this morning to free the world forever of oppression. They'd waited long enough for D-Day. And now they're firmly moving forward to another day, V-Day, the day of victory. With our strongest prayers and our deepest faith in the eternal freedom that will soon rule the world, we must stand behind those men who marched this morning. As this most fateful day in history draws to a close, we must look forward to that V-Day when our loved ones will come home to stay. In each prayer, let us ask God to speed the day that they'll return to the land they love. And we all must have faith, and our prayers will be answered. Tonight, as a cloak of darkness falls over our brave fighting men, we wonder what they're thinking. We know they're tired. We know they've done a great job today, and are going to carry on that job through the night and through the days to come. We wonder if they're thinking of us, or as we're thinking of them. Are they perhaps dreaming of the things they're fighting for? The hometown, the baseball park on Saturday afternoon, the girl they left behind. We know they're dreaming of the day when they can come back to the things they love. And tonight, we know that they'd like us to sing songs that tell of those things. I know they'd want us to keep singing, for that's one of the things they're fighting for. So, let's sing a song about V-Day. There's gonna be a hallelujah day when the boys have all come home to stay, and a million bands begin to play. We'll be dancing the victory polka, and when we've lit the torch of liberty in each blacked out land across the sea, when a man can proudly say, I'm free, we'll be dancing the victory polka, and we will give when the ration book is just a souvenir.
And we'll heave our mighty sigh
When each gal can kiss the boy she kissed goodbye, and they'll come marching down Fifth Avenue, the United Nations in review. When this lovely dream has all come true, we'll be dancing the victory polka.
Dance, dance, dance the victory polka.
Join, join, join the merry throng.
Sing, sing, sing the victory polka.
Raise your voices loud and strong,
And they'll come marching down Fifth Avenue,
the United Nations in review. When this lovely dream has all come true, we'll be dancing the victory polka. Usually on Tuesday nights, we present the greatest guest stars in the world in a show designed to bring our fighting men closer to their loved ones back home. Well, this Tuesday night on D-Day, the greatest guest stars in the world are in mortal combat on the coast of France. They're putting on a show that can never be surpassed. They have an audience as big as the world, an audience that is cheering them on to the final curtain, the curtain that will signify the end of Nazi tyranny, the end of bloodshed and terror. But one of the great guest stars we'd planned to present tonight has a message that we feel should be sent. And if our program here tonight can bring loved ones closer together in this hour of grim expectancy, then we'll be that much happier. We'd like you to meet a wounded American soldier that I met at the Torney General Hospital this week who has something to say about the invasion. His name is Corporal Joe Samatoik of the United States Army. Joe, I'm sorry things didn't work out as we'd planned tonight.
Well, Jenny, what we'd planned to say isn't half as important as what's being said right now by those men going into France.
Well, that's right.
But I do want to say this, and I think I'm speaking for all the boys down at the hospital when I say that we're darn sorry we missed the big show. We'd like to be over there with them right now, but I'm afraid that I just can't make it on these crutches. So about all I can say is, they're yours, fellas. Go get them.
Well, Joe, tonight of all nights, we wish that Johnny could complete a phone call I know you'd like to make. You're in a tough spot, on crutches and 6,000 miles away from your wife, who is an Army nurse somewhere in the British Isles doing her part in the invasion today. And I know that to call her right now would mean an awful lot to both of you. I know if you were there beside her, you'd have lots to say to her. We can't make the call, as you know, but by some crook of fate, she might hear your voice calling across that great ocean that separates you tonight. What would you like to say to your wife, Joe?
Well, just that. Well, Nancy, I love you lots. I wish I could be there with you tonight, and I know you're awfully busy working with the wounded boys. Well, I just wish I could help, too. It's awful being so helpless and so very far away. But be brave, sweeter, and I love you very much. I'll be seeing you.
Well, Joe, I hope your wife heard that message, because perhaps she'll hear your voice through the great din of battle and know that you, like millions of other Americans tonight, are praying for the safety and victory of our loved ones overseas. Come back next week, Joe, and we'll tell the story we plan to tell tonight, okay?
Gee, that's great, Jenny. Thanks very much.
Well, you're very welcome, Joe, and thank you. The world we love will live again. The faith we have, the hope renewed. Remove the thorn that's born of strife that brought the gloom again, so that the rose of truth and youth can live and bloom again. Another day is due again. A sky of gray live again when peace is found. And there's time for books and looks around at a country scene, a tree serene that stands above a meadow green. And in that tree, you'll see a nest where the dove of peace has come to rest. Tonight, throughout America, many fathers and mothers are wondering if their boy is lying on some beachhead, alone on some battlefield, wounded, perhaps dying. We've been told that the battle will be long and hard. The casualties will be heavy. Many of your loved ones will sacrifice their lives in this great march to victory, and we thought perhaps it would help you to know what your country and the combined strength of all the United Nations has done to ease the suffering and pain of our fighting men. We're honored to have a great man as our guest tonight who has worked in the battlefield with the wounded men. And he was awarded the Navy Cross for rescuing 9 men who were left to die during the Jap invasion of Java. This man who knows about medical care and what we're doing for our wounded fighting men is the famous and heroic Dr. Wassell. We'd like for you to meet him now. Ladies and gentlemen, we're proud to present Commander Cordon Wassell of the United States Navy. Commander Wassell, what can you tell the mothers and fathers and families about the preparations that have been made for the care of our wounded in this invasion?
The Army and the Navy, the Marines and the Seabees, with the Air Corps, have the best doctors and surgeons that America can produce. These men are leaders in the medical world. Such units come from Johns Hopkins, Mayo's, Massachusetts General, Washington Medical College at St. Louis, and many others, too numerous to name. Then we also have in this Corps your own hometown doctors. We have assisting them in the Navy, the medical corpsmen. In the Army, the medical orderlies. These men have been trained not only in medical care, but in the evacuation of wounded to a center that is staffed by the best physicians and surgeons in the world.
Well, what about medical supplies, Dr. Wassell?
During my evacuation of the wounded of the Marblehead in Houston, there was never a time that I did not have sufficient medical supplies and assistance to care for these wounded that I had charge of. And that was early in the war. Today, our medical supplies are 10 times as complete. Every drug, medicine, and instrument known to the medical science is at the disposal of the Allied invasion force. There's one point I would like to make especially at this time.
What's that, Dr. Wassell?
It's blood plasma. Take 10 men on the battlefield. The orderly or corpsman hasn't the knowledge that the doctor has, and he perhaps rightfully gives blood to those that do not especially need it. You might call that a waste, but it is not. To combat shock, the blood has to be given before shock sets in. And the orderly and corpsman rightfully give it to all of them. Out of 10, perhaps 4 or 5 did not specially need it. But an ounce of prevention there is worth a pound of cure. So we need large supplies to back up our men. Make your date today and give your blood. I've given mine since I've been back.
Dr. Wassell, how rapidly are wounded men being treated in this invasion? Will you tell us about it?
Even in the dispatches today, I noted that wounded men are being transported back to England, where I know they're getting the best care that can be given. They do not wait 4 or 5 days now, but get the men into a base hospital within the 24 hours. That's why our casualties will be lower than in previous wars.
You mean they work right on the field, too, don't they?
Yes, our doctors on the field with the corpsmen and medical orderlies administer first aid, which cares for shock, pain, and protection of wounds. These people are immediately sent to a base hospital. In the invasion armada are swarms of medical ships, large and small, carrying supplies to the front and bringing the wounded back immediately to safety. They're equipped to take care of the wounded right there, complete with doctors, surgery, and nurses. The smaller invasion boats that take supplies and men over immediately return with the wounded. No time is lost in taking care of the wounded.
Dr. Wassel, such news from a man like you should assure mothers and fathers and families in America tonight that their sons are being well taken care of on the field of battle.
The battle has just begun. The hardest fighting is yet to come. Many men will be injured. But to all listening in, please remember that our fighting men have the best of everything in the way of medical care. I know because I have not only worked with wounded men in the battlefield, but I have received that care myself, so don't worry. Your son is out there fighting with his life, but he won't have to fight for it. Good night.
Well, thank you, Commander Cordon Wassel. We're very honored and proud to have you with us tonight. Thank you very, very much. Tonight, our fighting men overseas would want us to carry on in the same spirit in which they left. In all their letters back home, they always say, "Don't worry about me, I'm okay. It's you folks back home that we worry about." Well, let's show them that we haven't lost that spirit. In our hearts, we have a song that keeps rising above our fears and gives promise of a bright and happy future. Don't you be weary. Don't you be dreary. 'Cause that trumpet's gonna sound. Just keep your eyes peeled and keep your lips sealed. And when that good news gets around, there'll be a jubilee. There'll be a jubilee. There'll be a jubilee upon that happy day. Sister, your man, my man too. Your man and my man too. Your man and my man too will be coming home to stay. Great day in the morning when that peaceful sun will be dawning. Oh, say, what a gay time. Why, the night will seem just like daytime. Sisters, there'll be jubilee, happiness for you and me. There'll be a jubilee upon that happy day. There'll be a great day. What a great day.
There'll be a jubilee, happiness for you and me.
There'll be a jubilee upon that happy day.
Great day in the morning.
When that peaceful sun will be dawning.
Oh, say, what a gay time.
Why, the night will seem just like daytime. Sister, there'll be a jubilee, happiness for you and me. There'll be a jubilee.
The great day's coming.
The great day's coming.
Wait and see, there's gonna be a
song of our dreams of the future, a dream of tomorrow that will soon be here, a day of freedom and peace, and a day when we will no longer wait and pray for our loved ones' return, a dream that will come true. In my dream of tomorrow, there's a bright, sunny day. I see Tom, Bill, and Johnny marching home now to stay. There are angels singing a hymn of joy. Church bells ringing as girl meets boy. In my dream of tomorrow, you are so close to me. In a home full of laughter, in a world that is free. So my darling Chinna will see. Till my dream of tomorrow comes Tonight, our thoughts are with those who are fighting for our way of living. In each of our hearts, there's a prayer for their safety and speedy victory. We have with us a man who has given spiritual guidance to men who have invaded other coasts in this war. He was at Pearl Harbor on December the 7th. He has seen men go into battle, and he was there beside them to offer words of comfort and courage. Tonight, he has a message of faith and hope on this first day of the Allied invasion of Europe. Ladies and gentlemen, may I present Chaplain Walter Peck of the United States Navy.
It is fitting and proper that in the midst of the confusion and excitement of D-Day, we pause to consider not only the military significance of the day, but the spiritual significance. We all want to win, and we all want safety for our men, the men of America, and the daughters of America. We speak of prayers for D-Day. I'd like to suggest to you prayers for every day. For this fight shall last many days, and men shall pour out their lives on bloody fields and aboard ships, that Old Glory may wave, and a decent and proper chance for life be everyone's. The efficacy of any prayer is the sincerity with which we offer it, and our own worthiness and faith, which will evaluate every utterance we make. America is fighting for her life, and she stands to lose her own soul. It is up to us that they who shall pass shall not have died in vain. Now, with those thoughts, may we all of us bow in prayer. God of our fathers, known of old, Lord of our far-flung battle line, we pray for victory. Not simply a victory of arms, but a victory which is thine, a victory of righteousness. We pray for the security of our sons and daughters. We acknowledge thy sovereignty, that all we do with thee. Keep the people of America that they may give of themselves as their sons are giving at this very moment. May the mantle of thy Spirit be on our men. Thy blessing on those who must die. thy courage in the heart for all here and for all there. Into thy hands we commit our men and our nation. Amen.
Fight thy battle on earth. As we walk through the perilous darkness, lend us thy holy light that shines in thy heavenly mansion to guide our path in the night.
And when thy shield and thine armor
To the gallant boys over there, they are thy children, Father, and this is thy country's prayer, that soon may the forces of evil fall at last on their knees, with the flag of thy kingdom of heaven flying high in the breeze. Then sons will return to their mothers, men to their wives, and then this earth will be like heaven, peaceful and bright.
This is the National Broadcasting Company.
The day of reckoning is here, the most crucial time in the history of the world. NBC will interrupt any and all programs to bring you the latest invasion bulletins. Stay tuned to WEAF New York.
30 minutes of music in keeping with D-Day, played by Roy Shield and the orchestra. The program will be interrupted from time to time to bring you the latest news bulletins as they are received in the newsroom. So keep tuned to NBC to keep in step with the latest developments on the invasion front on this Invasion Day. Roy Shield and the orchestra set the tempo of our half hour with a spirited march from the pen of George Gershwin. Strike Up the Band. Next, a typically American melody, one that has been handed down from generation to generation, one that is closely associated with America and the freedom for which we stand. Roy Shield and the orchestra play a special arrangement of Yankee Doodle. Newsroom in New York. London. The Nazi-controlled Paris radio said at 8 p.m. Eastern Wartime that an important American-British naval squadron was cruising off Cherbourg. This bulletin came to you from the NBC Newsroom in New York. Stay tuned to your NBC station for further news. A musical tribute to a gallant ally. Roy Shield and the orchestra salute the Russian cavalry with their song, Meadowlands. marching feet have followed the tempo set by a military band playing the next selection. Familiar to most of you, and always welcome on any program of martial music, it's the National Emblem March. A typically British melody as Roy Shield and the orchestra turn to the musical score of Eric Coates' London Suite. The Knightsbridge... is a march that is truly American from the first word of its title to the last note of its orchestral arrangement. The American Patrol. Here's a march dear to the hearts of every citizen of the nation in which the first D-Day invasion landings were made. Roy Shield and the orchestra play the French march, Le Régiment du Sambre et Meuse. change of tempo now as Roy Shield and the orchestra turn to an old Irish air in special arrangement. The orchestra plays The Minstrel Boy. Our program comes to a close as Roy Shield and the orchestra select a melody from the prolific pen of one of America's most gifted contemporary composers. From the music written for My Maryland, It's your land and my land. From NBC's Chicago studios, the National Broadcasting Company has presented 30 minutes of music in keeping with D-Day, played by Roy Shield and the orchestra. Keep tuned to NBC for latest developments on the invasion front on this Invasion Day.
The National Broadcasting Company.
Congressman Everett Dirksen, scheduled to speak at this time, will not be heard tonight. We hope to be able to bring Congressman Dirksen to you at a later date. WEAF, New York.
Having canceled all regularly scheduled programs, NBC invites you to listen tonight at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Wartime, that's a half an hour from now, over most of these stations, to Fibber McGee and Molly in a special Invasion Day program. Tune in then and all evening long to NBC for complete invasion news coverage. Well, D-Day is here. The culmination of 2 years of military planning and home front production was reached this morning when the first G.I. Joe and his United Nations allies took their step onto the sandy beaches of France's Normandy coast. The nation wakened this morning to a slow consciousness that this was it, and then went to pray and to work, to pray that the liberation of tortured Europe would be speedy and that our country's sons might be spared as much as possible. It was a day of work and of prayer and of hope. The National Broadcasting Company canceled all its scheduled programs so that news of the invasions could be flashed from coast to coast without a second's delay. All day long, people stayed by their radios and read their newspapers. But it is not really until tonight that America's thoughts on D-Day are crystallized. So now NBC will switch to its affiliated stations from Hartford, Connecticut to Oklahoma City so that this united nation of the United Nations may see how common is our purpose and how strong is our unity. In this special half-hour cross-country swing of America, we will also include the latest bulletins from the invasion front as they develop. And here is one which has just been handed to me. From New York, the Brazzaville radio, as heard by NBC monitors, claims that General Dwight D. Eisenhower has set up his headquarters in northern France. The Free French station asserts that Eisenhower's staff includes 4 famous French marshals. This broadcast was monitored in New York. Brazzaville says, when questioned about these reports, Allied official sources are said to have described them as slightly premature. But the Free French radio continues to broadcast the story of General Eisenhower setting up headquarters in northern France. The news of our landings on the continent reached New York at an hour this morning when only night shift workers, radio station and newspaper people, and barflies were abroad. But there was no hilarity, no celebration in Times Square. New York's Mayor LaGuardia set the theme for Manhattan's D-Day observance when he called the City Hall employees into his office at noon for prayer. It was not an island. It was part of the closely knit United States, which had seen H-Hour and D-Day come and which was determined to see V-Day, the day of final victory, come, and come, God willing, as soon as the determination, work, skill, and fight of 130 million people, plus their good friends and fighting allies, could bring it. Now for the reaction from the heart first of New England's vast industrial section to D-Day. We take you now to WTIC, Hartford.
What is the reaction of Connecticut to the invasion? Here at a WTIC microphone to give the answer is Eugene E. Wilson, Vice Chairman of the United Aircraft Corporation, Chairman of the Connecticut War Finance Committee, and Chairman of the Aeronautical Chamber of Commerce of America. Mr. Wilson.
In Hartford and Connecticut, the reaction was immediate and vigorous. We did not wait for June 12th. In Connecticut, we launched the Fifth War Loan with the invasion. We moved with the troops of General Eisenhower. Through the press and radio, we passed the word along to every town and hamlet. We began about 3:30 this morning, and soon our War Finance Committees went into action. The Fifth War Loan was underway even before workers on the night shifts had left their lathes and benches in our great war plants. When a few hours later our men and women daytime workers left their homes for the factories, thousands of them carried our Fifth War Loan battle cry, "We moved with the troops." During the hours that followed, there was a tremendous and spontaneous reaction to get busy to buy war bonds. In 3 hours this morning, the giant whistle on the Scoville manufacturing plant in Waterbury had blown 10 times. Each blast announced that another Scoville worker had bought a $1,000 Fifth War Loan bond. In the town of Ansonia, a high school boy was late for school this morning. He was late because he stopped along the way to sell war bonds, $600 in Fifth War Loan bonds. Thousands of people reacted to our battle cry, "We move with the troops," and bought bonds in a surge that resembled the buying avalanche that followed Pearl Harbor. In the General Electric Company plant in Norfolk, Connecticut, by early afternoon, the workers had topped their quota and immediately pledged to double it. As the people of Connecticut caught the spirit of this fateful day, more and more thousands of them came into possession of war bonds dated July 6, 1944. It seemed as though everyone wanted that unique souvenir of this crucial day in the history of our country, the D-Day dated war bond. At this hour, we cannot give you a complete summary of Connecticut's reaction to this first day of the invasion. We've about 3 more hours to go until midnight. And right now, all over the state, the buying is heavy in D-Day dated war bonds. Today, Connecticut has done much to lessen the worry of our troops abroad. Connecticut has proven it is with the troops. Connecticut is moving with the troops. And Connecticut will stay with the troops until the gallant men of General Eisenhower's army come home from the Great Crusade.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. From Hartford, Connecticut, we take you now to WSYR, Syracuse.
Reporting Central New York's reaction, here is Don Lyon.
With NBC's Central New York Invasion Headquarters at WSYR on the air since this morning at 12:43 when the first German announcement came through stating D-Day had begun, mothers, fathers, wives, brothers, and sisters of Syracuse and Central New York, men and women in service, have kept all telephone lines far busier than ever before, phoning in questions concerning the invasion. Two of WSYR's top news analysts, Vanabone Kerr, just back from an assignment as a war correspondent in the South Pacific, and H.R. Eakins, former UP bureau manager in Rome and the Far East, have been on the air all day answering these questions. Perhaps the most often asked question, or one related to it, is one that we nor no one else, unfortunately, can answer. It showed better than anything else the tremendous tenseness and anxiety on the part of all those parents and wives who have men from this vicinity now in the invasion area. That question, summarized, was this. Can you tell me whether or not the infantry, the ground crew, the signal corps, the ordnance department, in short, whether or not all services are involved in the invasion? Here, coming in over our telephone wires, we had the best cross-section of reaction on the part of Central New Yorkers that anyone could want. There was no gleeful shouting and cheering or raucous screaming of sirens. Instead, throughout the city, all churches were open, most of them filled all day. And in the tears and the voices of men and women phoning this station, you can understand why there were no cheers. This was no occasion for celebration, but an occasion for worry. Is my son in this? How far behind the lines would my son, an airplane mechanic, be? Are the troops from Northern Ireland taking part in the invasion? My son is there. Question after question like these, headlines, Central New York's reactions. And then came the perfectly natural but impossible to answer questions relating to the length of time necessary to complete the invasion landing successfully. These were the more basic and sincerely thoughtful reactions of listeners to this NBC Invasion Headquarters station, WSYR in Syracuse. But a little more superficially and perhaps a little more colorfully, there were those usual reactions that one always finds in time of an emergency. Such things as being able to walk for blocks in the warm, early summer weather and hear through open windows of houses you passed an almost continuous flow of news from the various radios in those houses. In restaurants, people hurriedly grabbing breakfast or lunch, depending on how early they had awakened. At the same time, not tasting their food in the excited savoring of the news from their papers and loudspeakers. This was Syracuse today, D-Day, June 6, 1944. Not a different city from any of the others, but a city fully conscious of the seriousness of the mission undertaken and the time which must elapse before the final battle and victory.
From the studios of WSYR in Syracuse, New York, Don Lyon has brought you Central New York's reaction to the invasion. We take you now to WTAR Norfolk.
And from the studios of WTAR Norfolk, here's Blair Eubanks.
Weeks ago, plans were laid to notify the people of Norfolk that the invasion of Europe had begun by the blowing of police and fire apparatus sirens. However, even though the fire sirens sounded at 3:55 a.m. for a full minute, most people in this vicinity were not awakened. It was not until normal early morning activities began that Norfolk residents, for the most part, realized that this was the long-awaited D-Day. Judging by the few windows lighted, thousands of persons did not know of the invasion until many hours after it was announced. But at about 8 o'clock this morning, small groups of people began to gather on street corners. From the looks of amazement on some faces, the news came as a great surprise. In Norfolk, great wartime seaport that it is, the Navy is always predominant. Yet the 40 or 50,000 sailors who roam the streets of Norfolk did not seem excited or surprised by the news of the invasion. Even though thousands of civilians in this area were uninformed, other thousands were kept right up to date on what was happening in Europe. These were the ones who were fortunate enough to have their radios tuned to WTAR. This station stayed on the air all night and relayed all the news. Overnight, a few Norfolk residents became experts. They not only listened to the radio, but carefully noted everything that was said. Therefore, when a question was asked, these embryonic news analysts would supply the answers. Here is an example. On the elevator this morning, there were a couple of ladies who didn't know anything about the invasion and said so in tones loud enough for everyone to hear. One of the fair but uninformed damsels happened to ask where the landings were made. Suddenly, a sleepy young man was galvanized into action and spoke up and gave one of the most learned discourses heard on or off the radio concerning the invasion. It was impressive, especially so before it dawned on me that it was almost word for word what Robert St. John had said some time before. The young lady was so impressed that she forgot to get off at the proper floor and consequently rode the elevator all the way to the top. She was not the only one who stayed on, however. I hung around to find out just how long it could go on. Apparently, the answer was indefinitely, because even though there were regular stops by the elevator, the young man kept right on talking. Before the young lady could get back to the proper floor, the embryonic news analyst had branched off into H.V. Kaltenborn and Elmer Peterson. When his feminine listener left the elevator, the young man looked quite dejected, or maybe he was just plain sleepy. He had a right to be, for apparently he had stayed up all night listening to NBC. We take you now to WSPD in Toledo.
This is Jim Ubelhart in the newsroom of NBC's affiliate station in Toledo. And the reaction to the invasion of those of us who have been helping to tell the story of today's stupendous operation is the weariness of body and the hoarseness of voice that will set in after many hours without sleep. Toledoans generally received the news of the invasion in much the same way as the rest of the United States. That is, soberly and thoughtfully. There was relief evident everywhere here that the long-awaited development had finally come. But at the same time, there was anxiety and trepidation for the sons on the beachheads. WSPD was first here with the official news that D-Day had finally arrived at 3:32 this morning, after being on the alert since shortly after midnight. Our first action was to inform the major industrial plants of the news, the makers of jeeps, guns, bullets, propellers, spark plugs. Their reaction was typically Midwestern. A few cheers, some expressions of concern, and then back to the job of producing war materials. No celebrations. Throughout the day, the churches of all faiths here reported an increased number of worshipers. The Red Cross noticed an uptrend in blood donations and recorded an increase in inquiries to its Home Service Department regarding the status of servicemen overseas. There was a gratifying response to a new request for workers in the Surgical Dressings Department of the Red Cross. The Public Library and War Bond Headquarters added many new names to the list of volunteer canvassers for the 5th War Loan Drive. What about the reaction of Toledo servicemen? Well, frankly, I couldn't find one to ask. But I do have here with me a fellow broadcaster who was recently given a medical discharge from the Army just as he was about to sail from an embarkation port for invasion duty overseas. He is former Corporal Charlie Norman, who watched his outfit sail without him. Charlie, what's your reaction to today's invasion news?
Well, my first reaction is like a prospective bridegroom left at the altar. But seriously, I cannot help but feel that at a time like this, my place should be at the side of my buddies. But although I can't be with them, I know that they will take care of the job that I started but couldn't finish. Now, in keeping with that, I should like to say, good luck, fellas, and God be with you.
Thank you very much, Charlie Norman. Now we return you to the NBC newsroom in New York.
Back in the NBC newsroom in New York, Hartford, Connecticut, Syracuse, Norfolk, Virginia, and Toledo, Ohio, all their reactions appear to be the same, grim determination to see this through. Later in this program, we're going to Cincinnati, to Memphis, Tennessee, to St. Paul, Minnesota, and Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, and it'll be the same there. Maybe a little difference in the kind of weapons of war that are being made, but no difference in the men from these cities who will use all these weapons, and no difference in the prime thought of all sections, victory and liberation and lasting peace. And before we continue our cross-country swing, here are a few late bulletins. The German-controlled Paris radio has reported new Allied naval activity. The unconfirmed report says that a large squadron of British and of American ships is cruising off Cherbourg in France. The second communique from Supreme Allied Invasion Headquarters announces that our troops have succeeded in their initial landings and that the fighting continues. it confirms officially the fact that the invasion forces met only light opposition in the channel or in the air from the Luftwaffe. Here's a bulletin from Moscow. An indication that the Germans are weakening in their savage 8-day battle near Iasi in Romania was given by Moscow tonight. The Germans in the last few days have suffered heavy losses, and Tuesday brought into action comparatively smaller forces of tanks and infantry, the Moscow broadcast said. From London, a radio broadcasting service to provide entertainment as well as to keep invasion forces informed of developments on all war fronts will be started at 5:55 a.m. tomorrow, the Supreme Headquarters of the Allied Expeditionary Force announces. The program, to be called the AEF program, will be broadcast over one of the overseas services of the BBC. Judging from this, our troops in France are there to stay. And now to continue our cross-country swing of reactions to D-Day, we take you now to WLW Cincinnati.
Good evening. This is Arthur Riley of WLW in Cincinnati. This industrial stronghold, center of the machine tool industry of the United States, took D-Day outwardly in the same stride that has won her the title of Queen City. But deep down in her regal heart, she pulsated with pride. Pride in the fact that her matchless war production has done so much to make D-Day possible. Pride in the fact that her sons and daughters are playing active roles on all fronts, and particularly because many of her children are doing their part over there in the invasion area where history is being made at this moment. And pride in the fact, too, like so many of her sister cities, she is girding her loins now to back the attack in the forthcoming war moon, in which she once again will bear far more than her share of the common burden. Churches and synagogues here today saw a constant flow of worshippers of many faiths, each joining his or her prayer to the national supplication for divine aid and benediction for the men and women from this city and from all other cities who are engaged in this epical crusade of liberation. And there was a quiet confidence manifested by Cincinnatians as they went about their tasks. They didn't forget to do the things they usually do, such as donating their blood and giving all the other evidences of patriotism which residents of this city give day in and day out without fanfare or noisy demonstration. Tonight there is only one cloud on Cincinnati's D-Day horizon. A work stoppage in the central plant of the Wright Aeronautical Plant in nearby Lockland, Ohio, is temporarily halting production of engines for warplanes. But that is entirely an unauthorized or wildcat stoppage. Some stores closed for D-Day, some flags were flown, but on the whole, Cincinnatians were too busy doing their patriotic wartime jobs to give much outward manifestation of their deep and abiding love of country and of their unswerving faith in final victory. This is Arthur Riley taking you now to WMC, Memphis.
This is Bill Reeve, WMC News Editor, speaking to you from down in Dixie. Memphis, Tennessee is headquarters for the American Second Army. General L.R. Friedendahl of the Second Army is a veteran of the African campaign. General Friedendahl was in command of the forces which captured Oran. He was later American Field General in Tunisia before assuming command of the Second Army. General Friedendahl speaks with authority on invasion. He says,
"While it is too early to predict how our initial operations will develop, the perfection with which they have been carried out thus far should be a source of pride to all of us in America. It is the beginning of the end for Germany."
Colonel Ron Waring, past National Commander of the American Legion, has this to say.
"It's what we've known would be necessary since we entered the war. It's going to be costly, but it's absolutely necessary, and regardless of the cost, it must be carried through to complete and final victory. We must not permit a compromise nor a negotiated peace with Germany. Germany and Japan both must be decisively defeated in military combat."
Judge Camille Kelly, nationally known judge of the Memphis Juvenile Court, said,
"All day I have been receiving calls from Memphis mothers whose boys are over there. I have told them to read the 91st Psalm. It is my favorite, and it is a glorious invasion prayer. Our staff stopped for a silent prayer today, and we read the 91st Psalm together. 7 of our juvenile court staff members have boys in the service, and today was a day of tension for everyone. It was wonderful to hear our president climax his speech with a prayer last night, just before the signals were released by the Allied generals for that invasion for which we have all watched so long. This war will not be won altogether over there, but a big part of it is to be won on our knees over here. God protect our flag, save our boys, grant victory to the civilized world.
There are many, many anxious mothers in Memphis tonight awaiting further news of this momentous D-Day. Mrs. Mildred Hawkins, whose son is a lieutenant with the American Army in Britain, expressed, "I have known that it was bound to come, and I dreaded this since my son is on combat duty, and his wife is a nurse in England. I hope this will be the beginning of the end. This has been my prayer all day." This has been a day of prayer, hope, and anxiety in Memphis, a most natural reaction to the world's greatest military epoch. We take you now to KSTP, St. Paul.
This is Brooks Henderson speaking for KSTP, Minneapolis and St. Paul. The people in the north central states almost literally got down on their knees to receive the news of the Allied invasion of France. Ever since January 26, 1942, the invasion of Europe and its necessarily horrible aspects have held the people of Minnesota, Iowa, Wisconsin, North and South Dakota, and Nebraska in an emotional grip. On that day, remember, the first American troop convoy landed in Britain. It was composed largely of boys from these north central states. These states have also been heavily represented in each subsequent troop convoy to reach the British Isles. Just a few minutes ago, I talked to some of the people of Hutchinson, Minnesota, a small town of a few hundred. Hutchinson is the home of Milburn Henke, who was the first American doughboy to walk down the gangplank when that troop convoy landed in Ireland back in January 1942. The people of Hutchinson are typical of all the people in the Midwest. They spent the day in work and prayer. Theirs were the intimate prayers of persons who know that the lives of their loved ones know rest more than ever in the hands of a compassionate God. Not only were churches devoted to religious services, but theaters and auditoriums also became centers of worship and petition. In Minneapolis, the Radio City Theater opened its doors for an impromptu, non-denominational service with Protestant, Jewish, and Catholic clergymen officiating jointly. Thousands attended. A similar meeting in the St. Paul Auditorium was just as well attended. Yes, the minds of the people in the Midwest were concentrated today on the news which everyone has expected not only for months, but since that day back in January 1942. And it wasn't altogether easy for them to concentrate. There were many distractions. The Red River, which runs along the borderline of Minnesota and North and South Dakota, threatened to overrun its banks and perhaps peril the wheat production of that area, which has long been regarded as the breadbasket of the world and which has accepted the task of supplying a large portion of the soldiers' food. It took the people of Tiope, Minnesota, less than an hour after hearing the invasion news to surpass their quota in the 5th War Loan Drive. And blood donor centers throughout these states reported donations up 40%. Communities throughout the Midwest area have been jumping the gun on the opening of the War Loan Drive. And at Plattsmouth, Nebraska, one war plant increased its production tremendously by the simple measure of installing radios so that employees could be kept abreast of the news. At Fremont, Nebraska, Dr. Charles McClellan led a mass prayer meeting. Dr. McClellan was well aware of the feeling of the men storming the beaches. He was chaplain for the invasion forces which swept ashore at Casablanca in North Africa. Many of the smaller cities and communities and villages of these north central states were ready to express their feelings over the invasion with a blowing of whistles and ringing of bells. Down in Lake City, Iowa, that was the plan, but it didn't go off as scheduled. The emotions were so deeply affected that no one remembered the bells and whistles. But on the Iron Range of Minnesota, they remembered, and by 3 o'clock in the morning, the folks of those cities were out in force. And they didn't celebrate, though, in the usual way. The men who mine that ore from the greatest open pit in the world decided, now that we're up, let's go to work. And they did. And that's the attitude of those miners is typical of the attitude of the people all over the north central states for whom I'm reporting. We take you now to WKY, Oklahoma City.
Good evening, everyone. Oklahoma City's reaction to D-Day was one of patriotic and spiritual determination. War workers at the Douglas Aircraft Plant were thrilled to hear the news that Douglas C-47 transport planes dropped the first invasion troops in France. For hundreds of these transport craft have been built right here at Oklahoma City. But these war workers didn't take the day off to celebrate. They stayed on the job. They've been working 7 days a week in an effort to turn out 200 extra C-47 transport planes in the first 6 months of this year. So far, they have reached 91% of their production goal in 80% of the time allowed. But here's how D-Day really affected these Douglas war workers. They're in a bond campaign. Yesterday, they bought $30,000 in bonds, all cash. Today, however, $58,000 in cash was invested in bonds by the first shift of workers alone, and there are 3 shifts. Close by the Douglas Aircraft Plant is the Oklahoma City Air Service Command, the nation's model air depot. Tears mingled with excitement and an air of grim determination at the headquarters of the Air Service Command as the thousands of civilian employees reported for work on invasion morning. While these war workers are a long way from the actual battlefronts, they feel the pulse of war more keenly because bullet-scarred flying fortresses and flak-ridden liberators from the far-flung war theaters are flown to this air depot for repairs. And out there today in almost every office and hangar were workers who are directly touched by the long-awaited news. Many wives, mothers, fathers, and sweethearts of servicemen believed to be in the invasion army gave their reactions to the press. Their comment showed unmistakably how keenly the news of D-Day affected them. For example, Loretta Rummelhart, who works in the Ordnance Department, said, "I'm glad the invasion has started, although it makes me heartsick to know that it had to come. I think America will cut out foolish things, such as strikes, and really get down to business now." And then there is Colita Garrison in the Records Department. She declared, "The news just makes me want to work a little harder. I have 2 brothers who are taking part in the invasion, one with the field artillery and one with the infantry. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, so I did a little of both." Then there was the spiritual side of D-Day here in the Sooner State Capitol. At this very moment, the auditorium of one of the largest downtown churches is packed with men and women from all walks of life, gathered there to pray and be led in prayer by pastors of 5 large centrally located churches. There were other services, too, during the day in Protestant, Catholic, and Jewish houses of worship. And then there were the solemn words of Robert S. Kerr, Oklahoma's Sunday school teaching governor, who said, "Let us pray God unceasingly for our fighting men, for their success, and that may be worthy of them." Dal Mooney speaking. We return you now to the NBC newsroom in New York.
Back in the NBC newsroom in New York, this then was the National Broadcasting Company's cross-country tour on D-Day, a program from every part of the nation to show what the nation was thinking and doing on this historic and momentous day. From Hartford, Connecticut to Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, the theme was the same: work and pray and fight. Meetings of gratitude were held, houses of worship were thronged. Here and there, sirens and whistles blew, but generally the reaction was one of deep emotion and grim determination. The National Broadcasting Company will remain on the air all night to bring you the latest invasion news as it happens. At 10 o'clock Eastern War Time, the Commander-in-Chief, the President of the United States, will speak to the nation. And at 10:15 this evening Eastern War Time, over most of these stations, we'll present Bob Hope and Bing Crosby in a specially arranged program for Invasion Day. Keep tuned to NBC for full invasion news coverage. Ben Grauer speaking. This is the National Broadcasting Company.
A 3-dimensional war machine has swept onto the continent of Europe. With NBC, invasion news takes precedence over all regular programs. In addition to special news broadcasts, bulletins will be brought to you as received. WEAF.
Ladies and gentlemen, Molly and I and our sponsor would like to say that we're mighty proud to be associated with the radio industry, which at this moment is fulfilling its promise of instant communication in time of world crisis.
The next half hour will be devoted to bringing you information immediately as received by NBC's news bureaus.
Between times, we will present songs of the services played and sung by Billy Mills Orchestra, the King's Men, and dedicated to our fighting forces on all fronts.
And now for music and the news as it arrives, as Billy Mills gives us a George M. Cohan medley.
We'll hear more from Fibber McGee and Molly later. This is Harlow Wilcox speaking. And now to the men who deliver our fighters to their posts, to those men who man the long sea lanes to victory, the King's Men dedicate this stirring tribute, the song of the Merchant Marine. Mills and the orchestra bring us now one of the most familiar of all marching songs, the United States Field Artillery March. are the boats and the men of the United States Coast Guard. To these men, Billy Mills and the orchestra dedicate the Coast Guard song, Semper Paratus.
Here's a song that's one of my favorites. The name of it is The Time Is Now. And it's particularly appropriate because if there ever was a time that was now, it is now. Here it is, as arranged and sung by the King's Men.
Are you ready for the start? Is your heart in the fight for the right to defend to the end all we love? Will you meet the final test with the best at your hand for the land we adore and oh glory above? The time is now, the time is now. It's time to heed the writing on the wall. For the world won't wait, since fate set the date and the time. The time is now. Oh, that Yankee do or die is on the go again. And they'll see a mighty show again. The curtain's going up. Can't you hear that call? That call to give your all. And the time is now. Welder with your flame, are you ready? Artist with your brush, what do you see? Gunner, is your eye true and steady? Civilian, do you really want to be free? Carpenter, miner, pilot, trainer, riveter, driver, entertainer, Army, Navy, and Marines, ready now to change the scenes. The time is now, the time is now. It's time to heed the writing on the wall. For the world won't wait, since fate set the date and the time is now. That old Yankee do or die is on the go again, and they'll see a mighty show again. Bugle boy, blow again. Can't you hear that call to give your all? And the time is now. The time is now. The time is now. The time is now.
Now that favorite song of the GIs, this is The Army from the show of the same name, played by Billy Mills and the orchestra.
Ken Darby and the King's Men put into words the feeling in the hearts of all of us as they sing, "This is Worth Fighting For."
Familiar National Emblem March really needs no introduction as Billy Mills and the orchestra swing into its stirring martial strains.
And now Billy Mills Orchestra and the King's Men give us the Song of the Bombardier, a song dedicated to those men who look through their bomb sights for a glimpse of the victory to come. The Song of the Bombardier.
Said the bombardier to the pilot, give us a little ride. The pilot said to the navigator, won't you slide inside? The navigator, he looked around and said to the engineer, your hands are dirty, your pants are dirty, you're dirty behind the ear. Said the bombardier to the gunner, how are we fixed for lead? The pilot said to the radio man, how's the weather ahead? The weather's fine for flying. The fog has gone to bed. There's such good visibility. You can see victory ahead. Let's fill the air with eagles. Let's fill the clouds with men. And we will see a world that's free when we fly home again. Said the bombardier to the pilot, let me have the crate, and 5 degrees to the right will make it just as sure as fate. The ship belonged to the bombardier who opened the bomber's bay. He saw the target, the enemy target, and suddenly bombs away. The weather's fine for flying. The fog has gone to bed. There's such good visibility. You can see victory ahead. Let's fill the air with eagles. Let's fill the clouds with men. And we will see a world that's free when we fly home again.
One of the greatest of American tunes is the ever familiar American Patrol. Billy Mills and the orchestra.
The orchestra brings us a stirring tribute to the courage of the men and women of our armed services everywhere as they play Salute to the Armed Forces.
the NBC newsroom in Hollywood, here's the latest version of the invasion battle coming from the enemy. Swedish correspondents in Berlin said the German High Command expects new and larger landings before Wednesday dawn and declared that several divisions now are fighting in the big beachhead, in some places hand to hand. These correspondents quoted Hitler's command as saying the invasion front stretches 240 miles from Calais to the Cherbourg Peninsula and to the Channel Islands. In a broadcast statement, the German High Command described the fighting in the Cherbourg-Le Havre area as being in full swing and declared that everywhere along the invasion front, British and American troops are putting up a most tenacious resistance.
As they fight and give them strength to gain, we pray the triumphs of the right. Bring them the comforts of thy love, the guidance of thy hand, that they may serve as from above thine own divine command. Almighty Father, thou whose love doth heed the sparrow's fall, guide thou, we pray, our men who fly where dark and danger call. Sustain and bless their shining wings through storm and battle thrust, and keep them safe as they fulfill thy children's sacred trust. On far-off plain or lonely isle, through storm and danger, Lord, be with our soldiers every mile, and bless our righteous sword. Though battle rage from sea to sea, on foreign land they roam. Protect thy sons where they be, and bring them safely
Ladies and gentlemen, in closing with the Army hymn, we know we are expressing the prayers of all of you for our men and women in the service. It's comforting to know that they have the finest equipment and the best leadership of any army in the world, and that no military operation in history has had the careful planning and preparation which preceded this invasion.
In addition, our men have a weapon which our enemies cannot have, the knowledge that God is on our side. To us, D-Day means divine help, and H-Hour the hopes of all of us for a speedy victory.
In a few seconds, we will hear from the President of the United States in Washington. So until next week, good night.
Good night, all.
This is the National Broadcasting Company.
It's high noon in New York and time for Kate Smith, who will be brought to you every Tuesday and Thursday during the summer by the makers of Sure Gel, America's fastest-selling powdered pectin product. Here she is, Kate Smith.
Hello, everybody. Today is a day that no living American can ever forget. Invasion Day, forged into our consciousness in letters of fire. It marks the pinnacle of weeks and months and years of anguished preparation, the consolidating of our mighty forces. This is the hour of the death blow to those, our enemies, who have spread evil, sorrow, and suffering like a black shadow across the face of this earth. This is the day of reckoning, when America and her allies go forward to the terrible task of crushing completely and forever the enemies who for 4.5 years have ravaged one helpless nation after another. This is the day that must mark the beginning of the downfall of Nazi Germany and the downfall of all those who have sanctioned and aided the brief reign of terror, the cruelty, insanity, and arrogance of Hitlerism. Let the blow be swift and sure. Let us be strong and unswerving in purpose, strong in the assurance that we go forward in a cause which is right, in the liberation of the oppressed and the restoration of human decency and dignity from the forces of evil. This is Invasion Day, Liberation Day. Here at home, we sit beside our radios, eagerly hanging on each word of news that flashes across an ocean around the world. We're filled with a conflict of many emotions, fear, excitement, and hope. But these emotions will not help those whom we most desire to help. They will not carry our brave fighting forces forward unless we harness those thoughts and guide them and use their power to forge an invincible weapon against the foe. Today, we cannot afford to stand idly by, scattering our thoughts so haphazardly that they reap only the wind. We must concentrate them on victory and turn our earnest, united thought into devout, unceasing prayer to God. Wherever you are at this moment, whatever you are doing, join your prayers with mine. A prayer for victory. Pray that our crusaders may be strong, that success will crown their every effort. Pray that they may speedily accomplish their mission and bring their adversaries to unconditional surrender. Pray to our Father in heaven to look down with compassion upon this sick and sorrowing world and guide the forces of right against the forces of evil and insanity. If millions of us, every man, woman, and child in America, will lift our fervent prayers to God, those prayers will be answered. You all know the power of faith and prayer. Use that power now. Use it with every fiber of your heart and soul and mind, so that your prayers, along with mine, may reach outward and upward to encompass and aid those we love and the cause for which they crusade. Lift up your prayers for victory and for peace to him who said, "Ask, and ye shall receive." And now, Ted, what's new?
Allied invasion forces are storming ashore along northern France this noon, taking the first long step to Berlin from a bridge of ships stretching across the English Channel. And the most important news of the hour, in the words of Prime Minister Churchill, is that operations are proceeding according to plan. Never before in history has the world seen anything like the invasion armada that stands between England and France and fills the skies above. 11,000 planes, 4,000 ships, and thousands of smaller craft are in action. And when the invasion was only hours old, the good news came through that we have seized beachheads which threaten the whole Normandy Peninsula and a rail line that runs right into Paris. The British radio says that we have a firm grip on 2 beachheads and that Allied formations are advancing inland possibly as much as 10 miles. Meantime, the German DNB news agency has admitted dolefully that American tanks have been put ashore in at least one sector. D-Day and H-Hour arrived between the hours of 6 and 8:15 a.m. Western European time, which is between midnight and 2:15 Eastern Wartime here in the United States. It was at that hour that land forces under command of General Montgomery began moving ashore along the Normandy coast in the Le Havre-Cherbourg area. As a prelude, the Royal Air Force staged a shattering 1,300 plane attack, and naval guns poured their heavy fire against Nazi strong points. A short time later, great forces of our airborne troops began dropping out of planes behind the enemy lines. In a speech to the House of Commons, Prime Minister Churchill declared, "Obstacles which were constructed in the sea have not proved so difficult as it was apprehended. the fire of the shore batteries has been largely quelled. Mass airborne landings have been successfully effected behind enemy lines, and landings on the beaches are proceeding at various points at the present time. Mr. Churchill, once more resuming the role of a war reporter, told members that he couldn't concentrate on any particular details, and the reason was the reports were coming in much too fast. He said, however, that operations are proceeding according to plan, and then he added, "What a plan." One result of that plan was that an hour after the first of the American, British, and Canadian troops hit the beaches, we had complete mastery of the skies over the landing area, and enemy shore batteries had been silenced for the most part. And because of these factors, our boys are now splashing ashore in the face of little resistance, correspondents say. Yes, the reports are really pouring in this noon. So let's run down the line and see what various quarters have to say. Most of the early news of the invasion, you know, came not from Allied spokesmen, but from the frantic Nazis crouching behind their coastal defenses. So first, let's examine Berlin's side of the story, her claims, and even more important, the things that Berlin admits this noon. The Berlin radio announced some time ago that the Allies have succeeded in getting landing barges into 2 estuaries behind the Atlantic Wall, and that they've gained footholds on several islands in the Channel, including Guernsey and Jersey. These landing barges were reported to have pushed into the estuaries of the Orne and the Vira rivers in the coastal stretch between Cherbourg and Le Havre, and the Nazi broadcasters acknowledged that Allied tanks have ranged several kilometers inland between the towns of Caen and Isigny. But Berlin's most important admission is that the Allies have penetrated 10 miles inland. Other German reports include one from the Transocean News Agency, claiming that a large Allied warship had been set ablaze in the Seine estuary by artillery fire. Another saying that at least 4 Anglo-American airborne divisions, including glider troops, have attacked the French coast between Le Havre and Cherbourg. And a third, stating that further Allied reinforcements are being landed by sea and air along the Seine, and that a naval battle is raging in the Channel north of Le Havre. And now for the reports coming out of Allied headquarters. The first communique came from our own leaders at 3:32 a.m. Eastern Wartime. It was an epic of simplicity, considering the momentous message it carried. The communique said, under the command of General Eisenhower, Allied naval forces supported by strong air forces began landing Allied armies this morning on the northern coast of France. We can readily see that a lot was left unsaid in that communique, particularly the scene of our invasion. It was not learned until some time later that the focal point of our attacks was the Normandy Peninsula, which juts out from France 100 miles below the English south coast, and then hour by hour the picture became clearer. We apparently were concentrating most of our weight against this peninsula from Cherbourg, at its tip, to Le Havre, at the mouth of the Seine. That's 110 miles northwest of Paris. Next, we received a report of Allied casualties, and that report contained good news, for it said that casualties among our airborne troops descending on France have been light. And then we received further details on the operations. For instance, we were told that more than 640 naval guns ranging from 4 inches to 16-inch weapons were supporting the ground troops, and that hundreds of minesweepers manned by 10,000 officers and men were moving up and down the Channel. And after examining these news highlights from the headquarters of both sides, you will note that the first mighty blows of the invasion have been directed at one section, the Normandy coast of France. But there are hints at this hour that new additional operations may come momentarily. Other invasion forces from the great arsenal of the British Isles may spill out into other quarters of Europe, notably Holland. Now, the first hint that the Netherlands may be slated next for invasion came from an Allied headquarters spokesman this morning. He broadcast urgent instructions to the people of Holland, warning them to flee inland immediately to a distance of 21 miles and to keep off the highways, the railways, and the bridges. The people of occupied France also received last-minute instructions. They were told that the Allied air forces have adopted a new manner of attack and that they will be given advanced warnings to leave their towns and cities before the mighty bomber fleets arrive overhead. General Eisenhower himself also had words of instruction and encouragement for the oppressed peoples under Hitler's domination. The Supreme Commander told them that the hour of your liberation is approaching. He called on organized resistance groups to follow his previously issued instructions, but he cautioned the rest of the people to continue their passive resistance until he gave them the signal to rise and strike at the hated Nazis. To his own soldiers, hardened and toughened by months of training, General Eisenhower had these words to say: The tide has turned. The free men of the world are marching together to victory. I have full confidence in your courage, devotion to duty, and skill in battle. We will accept nothing less than full victory. Good luck, and let us all beseech the blessings of Almighty God upon this great and noble undertaking. Meanwhile, the Allied Fifth Army in Italy has advanced about 5 miles beyond the Tiber River, and it's driving the Germans in disordered retreat along a 17-mile front from Rome into the sea. On the Russian front, the Germans continued their futile assaults on the Soviet lines around Yash in Romania, attempting to throw the coming Red offensive off balance. And over on the other side of the world, General MacArthur's forces are still driving ahead on Biak Island off New Guinea toward the Makmur Airdrome. Incidentally, Washington has given us a word picture of the typical American doughboy as he raced ashore in France this morning. And the gist of it is that he is by far the best-equipped fighting man ever to go into battle. The average hard-hitting Yank was, in fact, a walking arsenal. He carried nothing but weapons, ammunition, and a single day's compact food ration. But what weapons they were. For our equipment consisted of torpedoes for cutting the Nazis' elaborate barbed wire entanglements. And there were grenades, the famous Garand rifles, Browning automatics, and rocket guns, not to mention bazookas, flamethrowers, and demolition charges. Yes, the hard work of millions of Americans here at home will be reflected now on these mighty weapons of invasion. Donald Nelson, chairman of the War Production Board, says much of the equipment being hurled at the Germans this noon consists of weapons which the public has never seen or even heard of. And as the invasion got underway, an American correspondent rode in a plane watching the assault. And here is what he saw. No man's land is 5,000 feet below. It's somewhere between the gray channel-washed beaches on which Allied troops are swarming from their landing barges and the brown fields beyond. The wink of gun flashes and the half-light of dawn in those fields comes from Germans fighting the invasion. And as we wheel off the targets and we streak back toward the channel, dawn streaks the eastern sky. Peering down, you can see our troops scrambling ashore under a canopy of shells hurled over their heads by warships in a harbor that dents the shoreline. In the half-light, we can see the flashes from German shore batteries all along the coastline and inside the harbor. By now, as we fly across the white-capped channel, we have a bridge of ships from England to France. They range from mighty battle wagons to tiny, gnat-like PT boats, and they include all manner of transports and landing craft. Yes, this is D-Day, H-hour, indeed. Our sponsors, the makers of Sure Gel, America's fastest-selling powdered pectin product, allowed us today to dispense with our regular commercial announcements. This is Ted Collins inviting you to join us again tomorrow when Kate Smith speaks.
The Homemaker's Quiz. Question:
what is a practical, everyday way for me to help guard the health of my family?
Answer: one way is to see that your family gets the sleep they need. If you know that the caffeine in coffee disturbs someone, serve Sanka coffee, which is 97% caffeine-free. Sanka's real coffee. Delicious, satisfying coffee. It comes to you roaster fresh in a vacuum-sealed jar. So buy it today at your grocer's. Sanka coffee.
King George VI of England will speak at 3 p.m. Eastern Wartime and President Roosevelt at 10 p.m. Eastern Wartime tonight. Keep tuned to your Columbia station for the latest news. This is CBS, the Columbia Broadcasting System.
The following announcement is brought to you by the makers of Lipton Soup.
Folks, in this, the crisis of the war, all of us want to back our boys in the attack. Here's one way of doing it. support the Fifth War Loan, and buy more bonds than before.
Put across the Fifth War Loan. When you buy bonds, buy double. Rinso presents Big Sister. Yes, there's the clock in Glen Falls Town Hall telling us it's time for Rinso's story of Big Sister. The warm sun is pouring through the open window of Ruth Wayne Big Sister's hotel room. It's 1:30 in the afternoon. John is lying on the bed reading, or at least pretending to read, and Ruth is at a small desk writing a letter, or at least she's trying to write a letter. Ruth,
Mm-hmm.
you almost through?
No, not quite, John.
Want to read me what you've written so far?
I've only written 2 sentences.
It's as bad as that.
Well, it isn't very good. But I'll read you what I've written.
Okay.
Richard, darling, this morning when I got up, do you know the first thing that I thought of? I must write a letter to Richard. And do you know what else I thought of? I thought, well, it won't be long now, another year or 2 at the most, and Richard won't have to have Neddy reading my letters to him. He'll be able to read them for himself.
You're gone.
I'm afraid I've reached the end of the line.
Oh.
Not much to say after sitting at the desk 15 minutes, is it? Oh, dear, I never was good at letter writing.
Oh. I always thought you were very good at it.
Now, you know better.
Ruth, darling, do you know something?
What?
We're getting into a bad habit.
Are we?
Mm-hmm. A very bad habit. The habit of not saying what we mean.
I don't follow you.
Well, there's nothing wrong with your ability to write interesting and readable letters. But you can't write that letter to Richard because the kid wants to know when we're coming home. And that's the one question we can't answer. Huh? Isn't that so, Ruth?
Well, yes, I suppose it would be a help if I could name a definite date.
Help? It'd make all the difference in the world. And since we're playing this truth and consequence game, let's follow through, shall we? Or at least let me follow through.
What now, John?
There's no reason in the world for the 2 of us to be staying at this hotel. Has that ever occurred to you?
No.
Well, it should. It should have occurred to you a long time ago.
John, I'm afraid I don't understand you.
Look, the only sensible thing for you to do is to go home.
But, John, I thought...
Ruth, isn't it true that there's no practical purpose accomplished by your staying here? Isn't it true that now there's really no reason for you to stay away from Richard?
I don't see that at all.
You mean you do, but you don't want to admit it.
Golly, I don't know how we got started on all this, but tell me something, will you?
Mm-hmm.
Do you want me to go home?
Frankly?
Of course.
No.
Well, that's what I thought.
But that's no reason for you to stay around.
But you're wrong, John.
Oh, Ruth, darling, I shouldn't be so dependent on you.
Now, that's nonsense.
Well, I don't think it is. Ruth, you miss Richard and you miss
Now, wait a
Neddy.
minute, dear.
Well, I see no reason at
No,
all.
now, wait. Let me speak my little piece. May I?
Well, go right ahead.
Now, this is going to be one of those in the first place and in the second place little speeches. And you better watch out, or I may have a 3rd or 4th point to add.
Well, let's have the first point.
Right. Now, I think it's ridiculous for you to talk about being dependent on me. I think it's silly for you to want to see this thing through alone.
But, Ruth, I
still have the floor, John. I'm not through by a long shot. Darling, let's not mince words. This is a painful, trying ordeal you're facing. And it would be unfair and unthinking and unwifelike for me to walk out on you.
But, Ruth, darling, I don't think so.
Well, I do. And I'm sure if you thought about it a little while longer, you'd think so, too. Certainly I miss little Richard. So do you.
Yes, I know. That's all very well, but...
Now, listen. Neither of us is here because we want to be here. And neither of us should leave before this thing is settled.
I know, but...
You say you want me here. I want you to want me here. Well, of course I miss Richard. My goodness, I'd miss you a lot more if I went back to Glen Falls. Now, let's have no more discussion about it, shall we, John?
All right, Ruth. We won't. But don't think I'm not grateful. Well, nevertheless...
No, now, darling, if you start thanking me for staying here or any such nonsense, you're going to make me acutely uncomfortable. I'm sure you wouldn't want to do that.
No, darling. I wouldn't want to make you acutely uncomfortable. As a matter of fact, I'd give a great deal if I could make you comfortable.
Now, don't worry about me.
Oh, but I am.
But you shouldn't be.
Ruth, one of these days, I'm going to make up to you for all this.
And I don't like that.
Why not?
Because it implies there's something you have to make up for.
There is.
But there isn't. You couldn't have helped what happened any more than I could. And it's perfectly ridiculous for you to feel a sense of guilt.
Yeah. That's it.
What's it?
That sense of guilt. That corrosive sense of guilt. Oh, Ruth, when I think there was a time when... I'm sorry. I'd better take it easy. Don't look so worried, Ruth.
I'm not. Why do you smile?
Well, not because I'm amused. But, Ruth, hearing you say you're not worried...
You think I'm lying?
I think you're being tactful.
Well, that's the same thing, isn't it? Well, I'm not being tactful. I said I wasn't worried, and I meant it. Of course, things aren't the way I'd like them to be. But I will tell you this. I was a lot more worried before we got here than I am now.
Well, can't think of anything that's happened since we got here that should be reassuring. There's only one trouble with you, Ruth.
Only one?
Mm-hmm. Only one. And it isn't a trouble, exactly.
Well, come on, let's have it. What is it?
You're not a good actor. You say you're not worried, but right at this very moment, you're plenty worried. And I'll tell you what you're worried about, or don't I have to?
Oh, you better tell me.
Well, it's 1:35. I'm due at the Midwestern General Hospital at 2 o'clock. Should have been on my way to see Hollis Travers long before this. Why didn't you say something about it?
I didn't think I had to, John. I knew you hadn't forgotten about your appointment.
Oh, yes, but you could see me stalling.
Well, I knew you weren't eager to keep the appointment. I also knew you would keep it. You are going to keep it, aren't you, John? Why don't you answer me? Oh, darling, I want to get home to see Richard, and so do you. But if we keep putting
You're
off...
right. Yes, you're right, Ruth. You're always right. Don't worry, I'll go see Hollis. In fact, I'll go there right now.
John.
Hello, Hollis.
Come in.
Thank you.
Let me have your hat.
I'm sorry I'm late.
I was worried you wouldn't come, but now that you're here, it doesn't matter.
Where's Miss Stone?
She'll be here later. Do you mind being alone with me?
What? Oh, why should I?
You shouldn't, but I thought you looked panicky for a minute when I... John, look at me.
Well, what's the matter?
You haven't once looked at me since you came in. Why do you do that, John?
Hollis.
After all, if we're to reach an understanding, if we two...
Hollis, don't do that.
Don't do what?
I'm here for a definite purpose. We came here to...
Yes, John. Why did we come here?
Well, to talk about... Well, there are things that happened to us.
All right, John. Let's talk about it. But this time, let me talk about myself. I've been talking about you all this time. Now let me tell you about myself.
Hollis,
Let me tell you how it feels, John, to have you so close and yet to know you're so far away. Especially after those days down on that island in the South Pacific. Those horrible and at the same time wonderful days when we were as close together as two people ever could be.
Hollis, I'm afraid
What is it, John?
Well, this is a mistake.
Why, John? Why is it a mistake? Does it make you uncomfortable when I talk this way?
I think it makes it both uncomfortable.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't make me uncomfortable. And it shouldn't do that for you.
Hollis, we've a job to do.
Of course we have.
Well, let's get to it.
I will, John. I will in just a minute. John, is there any doubt in your mind that I want to see you get well?
Hollis, I don't think...
Nobody wants to see you get well any more than I do. I've more at stake than anyone else. John, take me in your arms.
What? Are you out of your mind?
Sometimes I wonder. Put your arms around me, John. Maybe that'll help. Maybe that'll make you remember. Put your arms around me, John, please.
Stop it, Hollis.
Everything else has failed. Maybe this will help you remember what happened down on that island. And what we once meant to each other. I'm sorry I didn't mean to sound bitter. But I can't help it, John. I love you.
Hollis, stop it. Stop it, I tell you.
Do you think I can? John, darling, listen to me.
Now, look, Hollis.
John, ever since I've been separated from you, I've had a sense of incompleteness. John, look at me. I've heard other men say that I'm beautiful. I must have seemed beautiful to you at one time. Put your arms around me, John. Kiss me.
Shall we go on with what we came for, Hollis? This nonsense has gone far enough.
Nonsense? Do you really think it's nonsense, John?
Well, now, what do you think it is?
I know what it is, John, but you don't. You're running away from something. John, listen carefully, my dear. You want to know why you're here. You want to know the real reason. It's because you want to recapture the happiness you had when you knew your own mind and were in love with me.
Stop it, Hollis.
Why do you want me to stop it?
This is ridiculous.
No, John, it isn't. John, don't be afraid to face the truth. Don't be afraid to look back. That's why you're having all this trouble, because you're afraid.
I'm not afraid of anything.
Then why did you ask for Miss Stone the minute you came in?
Well, all right, because...
The other day, when I suggested that you leave Ruth home alone, why did you agree? I'll tell you why. Because without your being aware of it, you wanted something like this to happen. You wanted to be alone with me. Isn't that true, John?
And now there's a long pause, and there's no sound in the room except the sound of the clock on the mantelpiece of Miss Stone's apartment. The clock that ticked eagerly as if it hurried forever forward, like a child towards some imagined joy.
Well, it's come at last. The news we've all been waiting for. D-Day and the Allied invasion of Hitler's fortress Europe. And so, to our prayers for a speedy victory, let's add our mightiest efforts to help win this war.
If you are an unemployed woman, single, or a non-farm housewife with no small children, there's a place and a need for you in war work. If we're to meet our war production goals, and we must meet them if we are to win the war, hundreds of thousands of women must get into war work this year. If you've been thinking about entering war work, remember, most war jobs are no heavier than ordinary household tasks. And remember, too, you'll be doing an important job for our country. Go to your local United States employment office and find where you are needed most. Do it now, today. We'll meet you again at Big Sisters tomorrow. This is Jim Amici speaking for Soapy Rich Rinso.
The town of Glen Falls and the names of all characters used on the broadcast are fictitious. This is CBS, the Columbia Broadcasting System.
And now, the romance of Helen Trent. Once again, the makers of Benefax multivitamins present The Romance of Helen Trent, the story of a woman who found that when life seemed finished, over, she could still recapture romance at 35 and even beyond. Gil Whitney, to whom Helen is engaged, and who must spend several months in a wheelchair until he can walk again, is convalescing at his home outside of Hollywood with Bugsy O'Toole as his nurse and general handyman, and his younger sister Marjorie as his house guest from Indiana. Every afternoon at 5, when Helen finishes her work as chief gown designer at Parafilm Studios, she hurries out to Gil's to have dinner and spend some time with him. And tonight should be an especially nice, peaceful evening for them, because Marjorie has flown back to Indiana to spend a weekend with her children. But the evening, starting off now, is not going to be peaceful at all. For today, Helen's long-accumulated disappointment reached a peak in her. Her disappointment that Gil keeps insisting they delay their wedding till he's well again. Helen, in an outburst of angry tears, said to Agatha Anthony, with whom she lives,
I'm going to talk to Gil Whitney tonight, like I've never talked to him before. I'm going to ask him one more time, just this once, this last time, to marry me and let us possess our happiness. I'll use every trick in the book to coax him and force him out of his foolish attitude. I'll cry and wheedle and if necessary, stand on my head. But I guarantee you this time I'll get results. And I should have taken this stand long before now, too.
By the time Helen got out to Gil's, she was calm again, very self-possessed and quiet. But she's waited her chance to speak, and now it's come. With dinner over, the two are sitting together in the lamplit living room. Gil has put his wheelchair next to the phonograph and is playing for Helen an old record of April in Paris, which was one of her favorite tunes several years ago. And Helen has just been telling him of the wedding this afternoon of one of her co-workers at the studio, Betty Fairfax.
You know, 3 months have gone by since you got out of the hospital, Gil, and we've done nothing about it. But in that same length of time, Betty Fairfax has met and married the man she loves. You see, not all people are spendthrifts with time like we are.
Please, sweetheart, don't begin on that again.
I'm not beginning now. I'm finishing, Gil. And you're going to listen. You're lucky I blew off all my steam and temper on Agatha tonight, so now I can be a little calmer with you. Look, Gil, this is June, and already we've thrown 3 months away. I'm now announcing to you one fact, and I mean every word of it. Gil, you're going to marry me this month or never. Do you understand that? Now, in June, or not at all.
Sweetheart. Why this sudden outburst, darling?
Because all of a sudden I'm sick to death of living for a future that never comes and chucking the present into the wastebasket. Why, you and I might as well be in the first stages of a courtship as the way we are now. I'm away from you all day long, and I rush out here at night. And can we have a meal alone together? Can we even find a place to sit and talk alone together? No, Bugsy's around and Marjorie's around and people are coming and going and I can hardly be close to you. So I'm starving a little. And I'm getting more and more angry and fed up and tired and disgusted with the whole thing.
Helen, do you think I don't feel the same way, too?
And furthermore, I'm getting terribly embarrassed at my doing all the urging about this. Do you think it flatters a woman any to propose to her fiancé at least once a day, every day in the week? I'm stopping it right now, Gil. This is my final time, and you can say yes or no. I think you're mean.
Oh, Helen, please. Now, wait a second, my darling.
Why can't I be taking care of you? I'm the logical one to do it, aren't I? I could quit my work and look after you, and life would be a beautiful thing. It's only for a while you'll be this way. And you won't even give me the privilege of helping you when you need me most. We could have all the long, lovely days together. It'd be something sweet we'd remember all our lives. And instead, you're keeping me on the outside where I can hardly look in. I can't even plan a meal for you, or get you your medicine, or even arrange the flowers here in your house. Marjorie and Bugsy beat me to it, and I just come out and visit in the evenings. And it's empty and lonesome. And I hate it. I hate it.
I'm sorry you resent so much Marjorie staying here, Helen. But after all, she is my sister. She's newly widowed. She has no money. Would you want me to completely turn her away?
I don't resent Marjorie. I just think you could make some other arrangement about her. You know she gets on your nerves and constantly tears down all the convalescing you do.
Nonsense.
That's the truth, you know it. Your own doctor said so. Now you're going to let her children come out for the summer, which will give you no peace and quiet at all, and you'll be longer than ever getting well so we can be married. Oh, you see, Gil, you see my point. The time has come when if we're ever going to be married, we've got to do it despite hindrances. There'll always be hindrances. The time will never arrive when everything's just perfect. Oh, I'm fed up, I tell you. I'm completely fed up. And turn off that record. I've had enough of memories in the old days. We're in the present now, and we're going to stay in it.
Very well, darling. Now, Helen, let's take one thing at a time. May I say a word now? First of all, about Marjorie. I hate to say so, but I'd prefer to be rid of her, too. She means well, but she's too difficult to live peaceably with. I told her I could give her a reasonable allowance to live on at home, but she's not satisfied with that. She wants to stay here in California. For the time being, I feel compelled to give in to her. I'm all she has in the world, and I cannot and I will not shirk my duty to my only sister and her youngsters. I couldn't look myself in the face if I didn't do what I could for Sis.
Well, let her stay here in California, Gil. She and the children could have my apartment in town if I were married to you and living out here. Said we'd keep my place in town anyway for the sake of convenience.
Sweetheart, Marjorie's not what's keeping us from being married. The fact that I'm stuck here in this wheelchair is as clod-like as a tree stump. Not earning a cent of money. Heaven only knows how long it'll be before I can get back to my law practice.
Money needn't enter into it at all, Gil.
You can say that, darling, but maybe I feel differently about it.
That's the first time you've ever mentioned finances. So now we have a new hindrance to add to all the others. Money. If you try hard, maybe you could add the weather, too.
Helen, it isn't kind of you to talk that way. Look, dear, you've never seemed to be able to see this at all. Try to understand that a man who has to be lifted around like a baby doesn't feel like a man. He doesn't want to marry the woman of his dreams when he's as helpless as... when he's utterly helpless. The very thought of that makes him wince. Try to think a little of how I feel, Helen.
Oh, darling, to me, you're not helpless. And I love you more now than I ever have in my life. It'll be for such a short time, Gil. Only a few months that you'll be this way. Why can't we take it in our stride and go on and live?
I want the first few months of our life together to be beautiful the way I've dreamed of their being, Helen.
You can't have everything in life turn out the way you've dreamed it. That's my whole point. There are a few times you have to compromise or lose out. This is one of them. I mean it, Gil. It's now, this month, or not at all.
You mean you'd break your engagement to me?
I don't need to go into details. I simply mean what I said.
Now you're certainly giving me something to worry about.
I'm sorry, but that's the stand I have to take.
Helen, has it occurred to you that something might go wrong with my convalescence and I'd never walk again?
Darling, will you stop looking for bugaboos? You know such a thing would never happen.
Such a thing might very likely happen. I don't expect it to, but it certainly could. I'd feel badly enough if you were married to a temporary invalid, but if you were married to a permanent one...
Gil, will you get this through your head? Nothing you do can wrong me. I'm asking to marry an invalid. I'm eager and anxious and yearning to. I want you just the way you are, or any way you're ever going to be. Because I love you more than all the rest of the world put together. Gil, you've got one bad fault. And I'm going to tell you what it is, darling. You're a perfectionist. You want everything to be perfect and ready before you make a move. That's an admirable quality in one way, and in another it's utterly destructive. Because every plan in life is too uncertain.
But, Helen...
I'm ready to reach out and take what belongs to us and deal with the hindrances afterward. If you aren't ready, say so. We'll let the whole thing drop once and for all.
Are you saying you'll stop loving me?
I'm asking you the questions now. Can we be married right away, Gil? Or can't we?
How long do I have to decide on the answer?
No time. Not any. I want the answer right now.
Well, it's been a long time.
We interrupt this program. We have interrupted this program to bring you another special invasion broadcast. We take you to London for the report of Edward R. Murrow. Go ahead, London.
Here is a summary of the latest news available at Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force. There is no cause for pessimism. The beach opposition was less than had been expected. Our convoys did not come under serious attack. The minesweeping was good. It was a low-tide landing, and the minesweepers did the most difficult job ever done by the little ships. They established the clear water, and they led the big ships in. There was no changing of course. They had to contend with a 2-knot change in the tide right in the middle of the operation. That meant they were sweeping in a strong cross tide. The weather has not been kind during the first phase of the operation. It was bad when the attack began, but the weathermen said it would improve, and they were right. Many of the men must have had an uncomfortable passage. The air cover had to go in low. But tonight it seems that the weathermen were right. The opinion here seems to be that we are over the first 2 or 3 hurdles, but there are many more to come. The American naval forces were able to silence the shore batteries at the points of landing, and our losses at sea have been very, very small. In the air, it is clear that the Luftwaffe has not given serious battle. Up to noon today, only about 50 enemy fighters have been seen. It is clear that the Germans haven't yet committed their air force, haven't yet made up their minds. It appears that the Allied air has done its job. Between midnight last night and the early hours of this morning, more than 31,000 airmen were over the target area, and that doesn't count the airborne troops. More than 1,000 heavy bombers were out last night. Then, more than 1,000 of our heavies went out at first light. After them went the mediums and the dive bombers. The lack of enemy response in the air is pleasing, but it is no cause for undue optimism. They still have a formidable fighter force. Their morale is still good. They just haven't made up their minds. They're waiting. Goering has issued an order of the day, telling the Luftwaffe it must beat off this attack at all costs, even if the Luftwaffe is destroyed. But he has not yet thrown in his main force. The RAF 2nd Tactical Air Force alone flew more than 2,000 sorties today, providing a fighter umbrella over the invasion beaches. Not a single enemy aircraft had been seen in the bridgehead area up to early afternoon. Returning pilots, who could see the ground operations, described the landing of troops and equipment as going like clockwork. One Spitfire pilot said, "I went through Dunkirk, and I am not ashamed to say that I cried with joy at the sights I saw today." One French flyer remarked, "We all felt as if we were on our way home at last, and it felt good." Prime Minister Churchill has just given the House of Commons a rather full report on the fighting so far. Here's what he reported. The landing of troops on the broad front has been effective, and troops have penetrated several miles inland. Lodgements exist on a broad front. Losses are far less than we apprehended. Many dangers and difficulties which appeared at this time last night as extremely formidable are behind us. This operation is proceeding in a thoroughly satisfactory manner. Airborne troops are well established, and the follow-up is proceeding with very much less loss than we expected. Mr. Churchill named a locale of fighting for the first time. He said, "There is even fighting proceeding in the town of Caen," and he indicated that the fighting was not heavy because in referring to the situation at Caen, he said, "The enemy now will probably try to concentrate in this area. In that event, heavy fighting will soon begin and will continue." Mr. Churchill said, "There is fighting proceeding at various points. We have captured various bridges, which are of importance, and which were not blown up." Mr. Churchill began his second report of the day to the Commons by saying he had been at centers where the latest information is received. After speaking of unexpectedly low losses, he said,
the resistance of the batteries has been greatly weakened by the bombing of the air forces, and the superior bombardment of our ships quickly reduced their power to dimensions which did not affect the problem. He called the landing of airborne troops a marvelous feat and said they were larger than anything there has been so far in the world. He said risks had to be taken in respect of the weather, but he declared that General Eisenhower's courage is equal to all the necessary decisions. He ended by saying, "It is a most serious time that we are entering upon, and we enter upon it with our great allies, all in good heart and in good friendship." And the Commons cheered the Prime Minister's optimistic report. And now, with the immediate worry off our minds about just the getting of a foothold in Europe, it's not too soon to turn some attention to the political problems that liberation, particularly of France, is going to involve. One aspect of the political struggle for power in France was illuminated sharply this afternoon. Early in the afternoon, Marshal Pétain issued a proclamation to the French people, urging them to do just exactly what the Germans want, namely, stay put and carry on with their normal jobs. Pétain's excuse is that any other course means reprisals and bloodshed. And just a few minutes ago, General de Gaulle, who is now in England, issued an appeal to France of an entirely different kind, an appeal to all Frenchmen to fight the Germans, fight them wherever and whenever they can strike, and with every possible means. General de Gaulle said that the battle for France was in full swing and that Frenchmen must participate in defeating the already retreating enemy. He told them to sabotage and destroy the German defenses, evade German conscription, and mobilize their assistance to the Allied armies. He called upon Frenchmen to obey the orders of the French government, by which he meant the Committee of National Liberation in Algiers, and also to obey the orders of the properly delegated French officers. All the hypothetical situations, assumptions, and conflicts about France of the past few years will now soon be proven or disproven in the light of hard results inside France itself. Another report out of Germany casts some light on what may be our strategy in this new attack. This report says that the landings are designed to secure the port of Cherbourg for the landing of heavy equipment, and goes on to say that Allied parachute troops have been dropped at both sides of the base of the peninsula to pinch it off. If this succeeds, the peninsula will fall to us by strangulation, with no way for German reinforcements to rush to the defense of that vital harbor. Whether or not this is so, Richard Hontelette noticed this morning when he was flying over that area that the coast of Normandy is a dead place, with not a truck or motorcycle moving over its roads. Meanwhile, there have been more reports, which we cannot yet confirm, to the effect that we have landed on the Channel Islands of Jersey and Guernsey. There will be a communique out later on this evening, and we will see how much of this the Supreme High Command confirms. We return you now to Columbia in New York.
You have just heard Edward R. Murrow, Columbia's Chief of European News. Here in CBS World News headquarters in New York is Doug Edwards.
CBS now continues its reporting of the news of the Allied invasion of Europe. You may be interested to know that since 3:32 this morning, Eastern War Time, and in the more than 9 hours since then, we've devoted approximately 7 hours to invasion news and analysis. This has included the words of fighting men themselves, reports from eyewitness radio reporters, bulletins from the press associations, communiques from Supreme Allied Headquarters, and urgent messages of government leaders speaking to their people and to all the world. Those of you who've been listening are aware of the urgent pattern we're following, which is to recapture the time of any regular program on our schedule whenever fresh news comes in from the scene of action on this great day of liberation. We have necessarily repeated much of the news in summary form, but have brought you familiar programs in their regular places whenever even repetition has run its course. Fresh news will, of course, be broadcast at any moment within seconds of its receipt and without warning. Stay tuned to your CBS station for constant coverage of the latest news from every theater of the war. Prime Minister Churchill said in London tonight that Allied troops have penetrated in some cases several miles inland after effective landings on the French coast on a broad front. That's a bulletin, and another one just in from the United Press quotes the German DNB news agency as saying this evening that the invasion front has further widened. And Reichsmarshal Hermann Goering declared in an order of the day to the German Air Forces today that the invasion of Western Europe must be fought off, even if it means the death of the Luftwaffe. That is another bulletin just received in CBS World News headquarters from an enemy source, Reichsmarshal Hermann Goering. Thousands of Allied bombing planes softened up the defenses of Western Europe for the Anglo-American invasion armies last night and early today, dropping more than 11,200 tons of high explosives down on the Nazi coastal fortifications in 8.5 hours of furious attack. The roar of the bursting bombs and the motors of attacking fighter planes rolled back across the narrow straits of Dover incessantly from midnight until 8 a.m. as some 7,500 Allied planes hammered at the network of enemy gun emplacements studding the Channel coast. By mid-morning, the Allied air fleets had swept the skies clear of Nazi planes, and fighters were racing as far as 75 miles inland without drawing a challenge from the battered Luftwaffe. That brings to mind that bulletin which came in a moment ago from Hermann Goering, who declared in an order of the day to the German air forces that the invasion of Western Europe must be fought off, even if it means the death of his vaunted Luftwaffe. Allied invasion forces so far have met less resistance than expected, both in the approaches of the beachheads and in the air. That is from the United Press. Although detailed reports of the situation are lacking still, it's summed up by one observer with the words, "We have gotten over the first 5 or 6 hurdles." And in a broadcast to his homeland, General Charles de Gaulle today called on French patriots to extend all possible aid to the Allied armies and, above all, to do everything not to be taken prisoner by the Germans. His talk, heard over CBS, brought home to the French the fact that their forces never before have had such a glorious opportunity to distinguish themselves. And from London, General Wilhelm Hanstein, the commander-in-chief of the Norwegian Underground, broadcast an order to all organized fighting groups inside Norway to be prepared to take part in the Great Settlement, as he put it. Hanstein told his countrymen that they would receive orders on what to do. "You must not act openly except in conjunction with the Allied military plan," he said, "and not before orders have been issued from London." Prime Minister Churchill conferred with King George at the Buckingham Palace luncheon today, and then both visited General Dwight Eisenhower at his headquarters. The King and Churchill also met with other Allied invasion commanders, and they received late reports coming in from the beachheads in northern France. President Roosevelt spent the early, tense morning hours of the invasion writing a prayer which he will read to the nation over all radio networks tonight at 10 p.m. Eastern War Time. CBS, of course, will carry his broadcast. After his fireside chat last night, the president went to his bedroom on the second floor of the White House. Between telephone calls from the War Department telling of the progress of the action, the president wrote a prayer which he wants the country to join in tonight. The prayer has been released for publication, and so that the country might know it and will be able to join with Mr. Roosevelt tonight in praying for victory and for safety for the American forces in this greatest of all military undertakings. Now, another summary of the invasion news to this point. Allied forces landed in the Normandy area of northwest France this morning and have thrust several miles inland against unexpectedly slight German opposition and with losses much smaller than had been anticipated. The grand assault, scheduled for yesterday but postponed until today because of bad weather, found the highly vaunted German defenses much less formidable in every department than had been feared. Airborne troops who led the assault before daylight on a history-making scale suffered extremely small losses in the air. That's what headquarters tells us, even though the great plane fleets extended across 200 miles of sky and used navigation lights to keep formation. Naval losses for the seaborne forces are described at headquarters as very, very small, although 4,000 ships and several thousand smaller craft participated in taking the American, Canadian, and British troops to France. Coastal batteries were virtually silenced by the guns of the British, American, and Allied fleets, including battleships, and the beachheads were speedily consolidated. The German radio said the scene of the landings was a 100-mile stretch of coast from Cherbourg to Le Havre around the Bay of the Seine and the northeast shore of the Normandy Peninsula. Prime Minister Churchill, in announcing the successful invasion to the House of Commons at noon, 6 hours after the first seaborne troops landed, said the landings were the first of a series. Churchill disclosed that 11,000 Allied planes were available as needed for the battle. The Allied bombers climaxing 96 hours of steady pounding, lashed German coastal defenses this morning with 10,000 tons of explosives. Fighters who went out to guard the beaches had little to do, however, as the German air forces up until noon had flown only 50 sorties against the invading forces. And as we told you a moment ago, the Prime Minister issued another communique from his headquarters this afternoon to say that things were indeed going at least as well and in some cases better than expected. The Germans were known to have probably 1,750 fighters and 500 bombers to meet the attack today, but they did not use them in the start, and why they didn't was not apparent. But Allied airmen warned that a violent reaction may be expected soon, noting that Hermann Goering, in that order of the day, has told his air forces the invasion must be beaten off, even if the Luftwaffe perishes. And the Nazi-operated Paris radio, quoting a last-minute flash from the battlefield, this is a German report, said tonight that a vicious battle is raging north of Rouen between powerful Allied paratroop formations and German anti-invasion forces. These paratroops had landed behind the Atlantic Wall defenses. The Nazi-operated Paris radio, quoting a last-minute flash from the battlefield, as the Germans put it, say that a vicious battle is raging north of Rouen between powerful Allied paratroop formations and German anti-invasion forces. 600 naval guns opening fire on the French coastal stretch west of Le Havre laid down a mighty barrage of 2,000 tons of shells, each 10 minutes, beginning at 5:15 a.m. today, British time, as the Allied invasion of Europe began. Apparently taken by surprise, the Germans replied from under a smoke screen laid down by our aircraft to hide us. The red glare of flames enveloped targets. This comes from Pierre Huss, who is representing the combined American press. Covered by the tornadic bombardment, British assault troops successfully stormed ashore at 7:30 a.m. and were clearing the beaches by 7:45. Beginning at 7 a.m., one of the most sustained bombardments struck. It must have stunned the Germans and apparently silenced the majority of the shore batteries. The Luftwaffe was absent. The Allied air forces appear to have complete sky mastery. During the night, minesweepers cleared wide passages for the fleet, and then destroyers daringly escorted landing craft to shore, while overhead airborne paratroops passed intermittently. And now here in our New York studio, to give you an analysis of the situation as it appears to him at the moment, is Columbia's analyst, Quincy Howe.
The news of these Allied landings on the north coast of France has given the war its most drastic and sudden change since the Germans invaded Russia. Up to less than 12 hours ago, the Russians, and the Russians alone, had engaged and defeated millions of German troops in vast land battles. Our North African and Italian campaigns had diverted some German strength from Russia, so had our preparation for invasions from the west. The fall of Mussolini in July and the fall of Rome, day before yesterday, hit German prestige hard throughout Europe. But until Anglo-American troops began to land in force in the West, it was toward the Russians that the Germans looked with fear, and it was toward the Russians that the people of the occupied countries looked with hope. Our landings have started to change all that, and the better and faster our campaign in the West develops, the more rapidly British and American prestige will grow in Western Europe. These landings differ from the invasion of Italy in at least two important respects. First, they show that Britain and the United States have developed first-rate military power on land, as well as in the air and on the sea. We're now able to come to grips with the Germans in their own element, that's land fighting, having already mastered our two elements, the air and the sea. The campaign in Italy amounted to little more than a dress rehearsal compared with the scale of the present attack. Then, in the second place, these landings in France represent our first attempt at real liberation as compared with invasion. Although the Italian people had little liking for Mussolini and nothing but hatred for the Germans, the French people went into the war against the Germans and have lived under German domination for the past 4 years. Just as the landings in Europe will demonstrate the military power and skill of Britain and America, so these same landings will demonstrate the popular following and the fighting power that the underground resistance movement has developed in France and perhaps in other countries of Western Europe, too. For these other countries have also received notification that the liberation has begun. At the moment, though, General de Gaulle has become the key figure in the whole European resistance movement. That's because the first landings have occurred in France, and because General de Gaulle has no rival as a leader of French resistance. But it may be some time before we know how strong the French resistance movement proves and how much General de Gaulle himself can deliver. Raymond Daniel cabled a dispatch from London to the